When someone goes long enough without being called by their name with kindness, they start to believe they were born to stay quiet. Each evening, she learned how to go home to no one. Each morning, she learned how to survive, like a habit, not a life worth cherishing. At 16, she became a mother. There was no crib, no congratulations, just a trembling hand wrapping around one even smaller, and the first promise she ever made: "I won't leave you like the world left me." Welcome to Zoohan Review, a channel that doesn't tell stories through tears, but through the spaces in the heart so wide the whole world could pass through and still never notice. Then one day, an old man appeared, Mr. Chin. No fanfare, no warning, just presence, as if sent by something greater. In his hand, a faded photograph, blurry, but sharp enough to reopen pages she thought had long been closed. Follow Zoohan as she searches not by map, but by memory, to find where she began and who she still is. Because sometimes, stories don't need drama to move us, only truth, and a little human kindness that refuses to ask why. Not everyone is born to be heard. Not every pain has an audience. Some people live quietly and disappear even quieter, unless someone stops, just once, to truly see them. If this journey makes you pause, please subscribe, share this video, and walk with us, because some paths stay invisible until someone chooses to stop and truly listen. Zoohan stared at the old photograph, her hands trembling as she touched the childlike face, her own face from long ago. The old man's voice cracked the silence. This girl, her name was Tian. Zoohan's breath caught in her throat. The name hit her like a forgotten melody, familiar yet distant, like something whispered in a dream she could never recall fully. Tian, a name she hadn't heard in 16 years, and yet, hearing it now made her knees buckle slightly. That was her. That was who she used to be. She looked back at the photo in disbelief, her fingers, trembling before, now clenched, the edges tighter, as if it might vanish. "I used to live next door to your family," the old man continued, his eyes misting over. "Your mother would call your name every afternoon. Tian, come inside. It's getting dark." And you'd laugh, always running barefoot. Her heart thudded like a drum in her chest. Those weren't just words. They were keys turning in the rusty locks of her memory. Suddenly, fragments floated up from the deep. A soft hand brushing her hair. A woman's voice singing. The smell of warm rice. A pair of sandals to bake for her little feet. Was it real? She felt as though a hole in her soul, one she'd carried all her life, had cracked open. And in its place, something poured in: warmth, grief, hope, and an overwhelming sense of loss. Mr. Chin spoke slowly, his eyes distant, as if gazing directly into the distant past. His voice was gentle, like recounting an old dream. "Your father, Han, was my closest neighbor back then. Both families were poor. Yet our encounters were always filled with laughter. I still vividly recall every voice, every smile from those days." Zoohan listened, her heart tightening. She had never heard about her parents like this, so warm, so genuinely real. Each of Mr. Chin's words seemed to reconstruct lost memories within her. Memories she didn't even know she once had. Softly, her voice shaking, she asked, "Then what happened afterward, Uncle?" Mr. Chin sighed deeply, sadness filling his distant gaze. "Your parents decided to mine for gold, hoping to change their fate. They believed finding just a bit of gold would secure a brighter future for you." Zoohan fell silent, her mind drifting back to the lonely years of growing up without knowing her own origins. She tried to swallow down the emotions choking her throat. "My parents, they truly loved me, didn't they, Uncle?" she asked, her voice hopeful yet fearful, as if afraid the answer would differ from her expectations. Mr. Chin nodded gently, his eyes filled with certainty and warmth. "They always loved you, Tian. I've never seen anyone care for and sacrifice as much as your parents did back then. Every time they mentioned you, their eyes lit up as if you were the very meaning of their lives." A mixture of happiness and sorrow intertwined within Zoohan's heart. She felt as if she'd just found a long-lost piece of her life. Yet, immediately afterward, she felt regret for not having grown up directly under her parents' love. She whispered softly, "I wish I could meet them again, even just once." Mr. Chin placed his hand on Zoohan's shoulder, gently encouraging her. "Your parents are always present in you, Tian, in every step you take. every decision you make, and in the way you love your child. That's how they live with you each and every day. Mr. Chin cleared his throat gently, continuing with deep regret in his voice. Your father entrusted you to Mrs. Tham's care. Your parents left with heavy hearts, hoping to return soon for you. But no one could foresee what life had in store. A massive storm came and washed away all their hopes. After that storm, I too went gold mining, seeking a better life. But it broke my heart to hear that Mrs. Tham had also moved away. Since then, everyone we knew lost contact. Nobody knew where anyone else was, and gradually, memories faded quietly into silence. Zhu-Han felt her heart become unbearably heavy, as if an undercurrent had swept away everything she thought she knew. She imagined her father, returning to the village in search of his daughter only to find nothing. Heartache, disappointment, helplessness. Those feelings must have once crushed him. She softly whispered, "Father, I'm still here." Mr. Chin's wife gently took Zhu-Han's hand, comforting her with affectionate eyes. "Don't be sad, dear. You've recovered a precious piece of your memories. Keep living well. Your parents would undoubtedly be proud of you." Her gentle, encouraging voice was so sincere that it gradually lifted Zhu-Han's heart. Mr. Chin looked over at little Tom, who was playfully running around the yard with an innocent, joyful smile. His eyes lit up happily as vivid memories of young Tian flooded back clearer than ever. Laughing softly, he gently remarked, "Little Tom is just as mischievous as his mother was as a child, exactly alike." Zhu-Han watched her son, feeling an unusually warm sensation rising in her heart. At that moment, she realized that despite many losses, she still possessed the most precious thing in her life. The loving gaze from Mr. and Mrs. Chin toward her and her child strengthened her resolve to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Mr. Chin gently placed his aged hand on Tom's head, smiling kindly. "Tian, you've endured many hardships, but now rest assured, my wife and I will always be by your side. Life ahead will be better. Believe in that, because you and Tom deserve happiness." These heartfelt words deeply moved Zhu-Han to tears. She knew the journey to reconnect with her past was far from over, but now she was no longer alone. She had found loved ones who were always ready to embrace and love her unconditionally. Zhu-Han said nothing more. She sat quietly, as if every word had settled into her eyes. There was no distance left, no question bold enough to interrupt that moment. Only a quiet ache rising slowly, as she realized she was sitting in the middle of something deeply real. Someone had known her before she ever knew herself. A name spoken not out of surprise, not out of curiosity, but like it had been waiting for her all these years. Mrs. Chin placed her hand gently over Zhu-Han's. She didn't say it's okay or don't cry. She didn't need to. Her hand, warm and fragile, trembled slightly, yet it felt steady like to her. Zhu-Han didn't pull away. She stayed, not out of politeness, but because in that touch, she felt something she'd never known before, the quiet weight of being accepted, without question. Without needing to explain who she was, Mr. Chin sat down slowly, the photo still in his hand. His eyes didn't leave it. He spoke not to explain, but as if he was remembering aloud. She was a bright child, always barefoot, always laughing. She used to chase butterflies in the yard. Her voice carried across the fence like a bell. Sometimes she'd bring flowers to his wife. He paused, looked at Zhu-Han again. "We used to call you our little sunbeam." The memory rolled on, not rushed, not forced. He spoke of the red dress she wore every Tet, how she cried when the ribbon came undone, how her mother had to carry her inside during storms because she wouldn't leave the puddles. Zhu-Han didn't speak, she just listened, and in that quiet listening, something fragile opened. A past she didn't remember, but now could picture, not because it came from her but because someone else had kept it safe. Before parting ways, the three of them lingered together, chatting joyfully as if they had known each other forever. Little stories about the past, about Tian as a child, about Tom now, filled the air with warmth and affection. They didn't just say goodbye. They exchanged tender looks and firm handshakes, as if trying to hold on to the moment a little longer. The path back to Yuan's house seemed greener than usual. Zhu-Han walked slowly, holding Tom against her chest. His arms clung to her loosely, head resting on her shoulder. he babbled softly, pointing now and then at passing leaves. She didn't rush. The air felt gentler today. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was her that had changed. Each step back toward Yuan's house felt lighter, not because the road was smooth, but because her heart no longer carried the same weight it did that morning. Tom let out a sudden giggle as a butterfly fluttered by. He wriggled excitedly, his tiny hands reaching for theirs. Zhu-Han smiled, instinctively turning so he could see more. There was no reason to hurry. For the first time in a long while, she allowed the moment to stretch. No thoughts of yesterday, no fear of tomorrow, just this. Her child's laugh, the wind in the trees, and the quiet joy of not needing anything else. They passed an old fence overgrown with morning glories. Tom babbled, his voice rising and falling like a song only he knew. Zhu-Han didn't try to hush him. That sound so alive filled the narrow path with warmth. She looked down at the dirt road, worn and cracked. It reminded her of herself, but today, even the cracks felt soft. Nothing had been fixed, but something inside her had settled, and that was enough for now. Tom tugged gently at her shirt. She looked down and saw him grinning, two little teeth peeking out. He babbled again, pointing at a banana leaf above. She nodded without needing to know what he meant. It didn't matter. Understanding wasn't always in words. Sometimes, it lived in glances, touches, and presence. And in that moment, she understood everything her child was trying to say, I simply by being there, in her arms, safe and bright. A breeze swept by, carrying the smell of dust and leaves. Tom leaned his head against her cheek, warm and content. Zhu-Han closed her eyes for a second. She let herself feel it all. The weight of her son, the lightness in her chest, the quiet pulse of joy that had no name. This was not the end of anything, but it felt like the beginning of something new, and she welcomed it with both hands. Today's story ends here, but Zhu-Han's journey is far from over. If this story warmed your heart, please leave a like, share, and subscribe to Zhu-Han Review to follow along with us in the next episodes, because some of the quietest lives hold the most moving truths.